The next day was Sunday. Jacob got up early and jogged on the beach before practicing the fundamental boxing techniques. Then he drove the Ferrari to Helen's studio. This early on a Sunday morning, the city was very quiet, as it had not woken up yet. Jacob looked around the quiet office buildings as he drove into the art district. The shell of the deserted factory shielded the entire art district, and the atmosphere was cold and bleak. Suddenly, 2 dashes of light flashed by in the sky. If Jacob's senses were like ordinary people, he wouldn't have caught them. On clear days, the dragon cultivators were not allowed to fly in the low sky. This rule appeared in Jacob's mind. Judging from the fast speed of the 2 dashes of light, Jacob knew that they were at least cultivators of the 3rd level. Since Snowflake was still sleeping in the house, Jacob couldn't fly right now. He could only release 2 sword energies at the 2 dashes of light as a warning. Dracon was strict with his people, and he rarely flew himself. Therefore, Jacob believed that these 2 people didn't belong to the North Atlantic Dragon Clan. In the city, and especially in the universities of the city, there were quite a few members of other dragon clans. Apparently, these young cultivators have gotten unconstrained since Susan hasn't been around for a while now, he thought. Jacob's 2 sword energies chased the 2 dashes of light at a fast speed, since the sharp sword energies could split wind and travel faster than ordinary flight treasures. The power of the 2 sword energies was not strong. They were meant to remind and warn those 2 people. Suddenly, Jacob sensed that someone destroyed his sword energies, and he felt a little discomfort. Also, the people who destroyed his sword energies didn't reply with any signals. Since this was the case, Jacob was forced to move. He released a red energy sphere as a cover while he emitted a ton of sword energies. Like missiles, the sword energies shot out and formed a huge 5-colored sword before piercing into the sky. In the sky, 2 middle-aged cultivators were flying shoulder to shoulder. They each had a sword under their feet.
Master, I never expected that the world under 5th heaven would be so prosperous.
The cultivator on the right looked down at the city below the thin clouds and commented. The cultivator who had just destroyed Jacob's warning sword energies stroked his goatee and remained silent. The cultivator on the right said with resentment,
The dragon tribe has occupied the land for more than 1,000 years, and it's time for us to return to it. The mortals are weak and useless, but they possess such vast lands. Our sect only has 2 mountains on 5th heaven. If we return here... Before he could finish, a huge sword shot toward them. The cultivator on the left was prepared. He immediately threw out a shiny golden 8-trigram disc toward Jacob's sword energy. With a loud noise, a large hole with a diameter of 10 meters appeared in the clouds. Jacob's sword energy was scattered immediately. Useless technique. The cultivator on the left was confident. After destroying Jacob's 2 sword energies, he knew that they were discovered by the cultivators on the land, and thus was prepared. However, due to the weak strength in the 2 sword energies, he thought the attacker was not very strong. While his 8-trigram disc shone brightly, the scattered sword energy sparks suddenly gathered together again before forming 80 smaller sword energies. Metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. Each elemental essence had 16 sword energies. Passing the rotating 8-trigram disc, the 80 sword energies shot toward them fiercely. Sword array formation! The cultivator on the left was astonished, but it was too late for him to defend or flee. Since he destroyed Jacob's 2 sword energies, Jacob decided not to let them go. 80 sword energies connected, forming the snake array formation and surrounding the 2 men in the sky. Then, the sword energies tumbled, and the swords all had their tips pointing at the 2 men in the center of the circle.
The sword energies pointed at the two men like arrows, forcing them to freeze on the spot. Jacob couldn't see the situation in the sky, but he had a rough idea from his senses in the sword energies. The sword energies moved closer, and the circle got smaller. In several seconds, the swords would touch their noses.
Master, what should we do?
The cultivator on the right asked anxiously.
The regional inspector hasn't shown herself for a long time, so I didn't expect that this place was still guarded. I was too careless.
The middle-aged cultivator on the left gritted his teeth before spitting out a mouthful of essence blood onto the sword under his feet. Then, his sword shot up immediately, carrying him with it. The 80 sword energies followed him. They shot upward and formed a net-like ceiling. The fleeing cultivator got 4 to 5 deep cuts in his shoulders, and blood gushed out. The sword energies continued to tighten the circle at a measured pace. Jacob controlled the sword energies with his mind, from a distance, and he did it effortlessly. If he knew that there were only 2 cultivators at the core formation realm, one top tier and one mid tier, he would have admired their courage for getting so close to First Heaven with such weak cultivation strengths. Of course, Jacob didn't know that the core formation realm cultivators were regarded as powerful masters on Fifth Heaven. Recently, since Susan was recovering from her injuries in the North Atlantic Dragon Palace, and the North Atlantic Dragon Clan was busy dealing with the South Atlantic Dragon Clan, the area of the city was not guarded as tightly. Therefore, some dominant sects from Fifth Heaven sent some scouts to test the waters and found no defense. The lack of defense enticed the smaller cultivation sects, which had little chance of growth in Fifth Heaven, so they sent masters down to get more information. However, the cultivators in these smaller sects had little scouting experience, and they got too close to First Heaven and were detected by Jacob. If they had cooperated, Jacob probably would have let them go. However, they destroyed Jacob's sword energies, forcing the assisting inspector to use force. Seeing his master, who was a top-tier core formation realm cultivator, bleed from one attack, the other cultivator froze in fear, forgetting his ambition of taking back the land by force. Mortals were indeed fragile, but the dragon cultivators were very powerful. While the sword energies were pushed down little by little, the 2 cultivators were forced to come down from the sky little by little. Having experienced the power of this sword array formation, they knew without a doubt that they would probably get killed if they refused to cooperate again. However, they didn't know that the master who defeated and cornered them with 2 attacks was not hiding on purpose. He just couldn't fly. With Susan's absence, the young cultivators in the city are getting wild. Looking up into the sky, Jacob murmured to himself. He controlled the 80 sword energies and lowered them by another half meter. Jacob created a red energy sphere and leaped up more than 10 meters. After kicking the wall, he leaped again and landed on the wall of the skyscraper on the opposite side. The whole process was quick and light. After 4 leaps, he reached the top of the highest skyscraper in the area. Without the red energy sphere, people would have seen him and thought that he was Superman without the costume. In fact, Jacob didn't have a choice. Although he had reached the 3rd level, he didn't have a flight treasure. If he wanted to fly, he needed Snowflake's help. The umbrella formed by the 80 sword energies hummed and forced the 2 cultivators onto the top of the skyscraper. With his hands behind his back, Jacob was surprised to see that the 2 people who flew against the rules were 2 middle-aged cultivators. Caught red-handed, the 2 cultivators were shivering all over. They enjoyed quite high rankings in their own sect, but this was their first time scouting near First Heaven. They had flown around the city and encountered no obstacles. Thus, they grew bold and then were caught by Jacob. It was their first time standing on the land. Under Jacob's stare, they were extremely uneasy.
You
Jacob opened his mouth and was about to ask them something. The top-tier core formation realm cultivator suddenly kneeled before him and said,
"Please forgive me. Please spare my life."
The other cultivator beside him followed suit. He kneeled and was even about to start sobbing. Jacob had just reached the 3rd level, which was equivalent to the core formation realm, but he was technically a low-tier core formation realm cultivator. He didn't know what to do with them as he looked at them. He thought that he should lecture the cultivators who flew against the rules as the assisting inspector, but he didn't expect that these 2 cultivators were actually scouts from 5th Heaven. He also didn't know about the complicated situation on and above 5th Heaven, where it was ruled by the law of the jungle, especially on 5th Heaven, where most of the smaller sects resided. The cultivators in core formation realm could get killed the moment they stepped out of the door of their sect. In comparison, the world under 5th Heaven was a paradise for cultivators. Although it was far from 9th Heaven and the essences weren't abundant, there were a lot of sea resources and the landmass was huge. Most importantly, the world was peaceful. Jacob, who lived in this paradise, couldn't understand the fear in these 2 cultivators' minds. He looked at them and didn't know how to question them.